Welcome and thank you for joining us for the Ask the Counselor webinar on mental health and social emotional learning during COVID-19. This is the second official webinar that New Brunswick Public Schools has organized to aid in the fight against COVID-19. As always, we're here to help you as best as we can during this pandemic. Before we get started, we'd like to give a grateful thank you to the New Brunswick Board of Education for making this and other resources available to the community. I'm Eshaya Draper from the Office of the Superintendent, and I'll be moderating today with Dorinia Villalona, Assistant to the Superintendent. We want to especially thank our experienced social worker, Dr. Donald Stager, for providing us with information today. Dr. Stager is the clinical supervisor for the School-Based Youth Services, a program providing mental health and case management services in 4 of our schools in New Brunswick. This is possible through a partnership with the New Brunswick Tomorrow and YAP Inc. He is a licensed clinical social worker in the state of New Jersey and a part-time lecturer at the Rutgers Graduate School of Social Work, where he specializes in advanced clinical study and providing services to immigrants and refugees. Dr. Stager is a graduate of Drew University, where he obtained his doctorate in pastoral counseling, and Rutgers University, where he earned both his master's in social work and undergraduate degree in Spanish. He has provided workshops on understanding the mental health needs of the migrant community. This webinar is also being provided in Spanish again, with translations provided by Dr. Andrea Fontañez from our district's bilingual education office. We'd like to also notify you that this webinar is being recorded for informational purposes and will be shared on the district's website at nbpschools.net to be watched and reviewed as many times as you like. Before we get ready to begin, you will notice a link on the bottom of the screen throughout the presentation. You can navigate to this link at nbpschools.net/questions at any time to submit questions. Dr. Stager will be addressing these questions and concerns at the end of our discussion. For anyone just joining, this is the Ask the Counselor webinar on mental health and social emotional learning during COVID-19, provided by the New Brunswick Board of Education. Most importantly, we want to thank you again for taking time out of your day to be with us and taking advantage of this great opportunity. It is now my pleasure to welcome Dr. Donald Stager.
Well, thank you, Eshaya, for that wonderful introduction. I don't know how you found out all of those wonderful things about me. Oh, that's right. I wrote it. It's an honor and a privilege for me to be here this afternoon with you to spend some time talking about mental health and social emotional learning in the time of COVID-19. So what is this thing called social emotional learning? Well, it's something that you and I have learned from the time that we were born up to today. It's how we figure out how to use the things that we learned from our parents, from our grandparents, from our culture, from our society, from our teachers, and some of the attitudes that we may have towards life, and the skills that we've developed over the course of our current lifetimes to be able to manage our emotions. And what that means is so that we're not blowing up in anger, or we're not crying, or we're not laughing hysterically all the time. And it also gives us the skills to be able to make positive goals for ourselves, realistic ones, to be able to show empathy, which especially in this time is very important, and also be able to have good, long-lasting relationships, and ultimately to be able to have responsibility in our decision making, making the best possible decisions. So where does this thing come from? Well, it comes from our families. When we were born into our families, mom, dad, sisters, brothers, grandparents, uncles, aunts, all told us certain words of wisdom. And those became some of what we learned. For instance, be quiet when you're in church. That was the one I learned. Or you got pinched. remember always to do your homework. It also comes from culture, things that we've learned from our ethnic cultures that come into play. For instance, the importance of things like quinceañeras, the importance of celebrating life milestones throughout our lives, the importance of certain foods that we enjoy, the kind of music that we listen to, the way we express ourselves, all comes from the culture, the way we see the world. Oops, that was too fast. We also learn things in school. You know, when we go to school, we're told, wait quietly in the hallway, raise your hand when you want to talk, don't look at your neighbor's paper when you're taking a quiz or a test. Be sure to come to school on time. Make sure you come to school. Don't fight, don't argue. If you have a problem, go to an adult. All those kind of things that we learn in a school setting, along with some critical thinking. How should we be able to solve problems? How should we be able to look at things? And then the other way that we learn is just from other people. Some of you who have children out there may have asked yourself a question like this: wherever did my son or daughter learn to say that? We don't say that, or we don't do that. Where did that come from? It comes from other people, people that we go to school with, people that we live around, that influence in our day-to-day experiences in life. And so all of these put together is how we actually come to have these things called social emotional learning. So family. Every one of our families is a bit different. We have values, we have ideals, we have customs, and we get these things from the moment that we are born. You know, values such as hard work is a good thing, customs such as we celebrate certain holidays, the ideals that we have, that being successful is important. Those are things that come from our family because they've come from our moms, our dads, our grandparents, significant others in our family. And we learn and we continue to learn through the way that our family deals with things. So the social emotional learning doesn't end when you reach the age of 18 or 21. It continues throughout life because life is filled with many different changes that come about. And those of us living through this experience now of COVID-19 are having an awful lot of different things happening to us, no matter how old we are. We also continue to learn and learn as our families change. They start off small, 2 people together. Then they grow in size as children come about in the relationships. And then at some point, the children may move away. And then you're back to the same 2 that you began with. And each step of that process, we learn something else about ourselves and how to deal with certain things. So the relationship between partners in a relationship, changes if children come into the picture, because now it's just not two, it's three, four, or more, and each one has certain requests, certain needs, and we have to learn that sometimes that partnership relationship takes a back seat, if you will, to where it used to be. And then when the children move out of the house at some point, you go back from having this large group of people where you all interacted and learned how to live together in harmony and peace, and now it's the partners again. And so we have to learn all over again, how do we relate to one another in this small group? And we also learn and continue to learn from each new person that comes into our family circle. So marriage, children, people that are just coming in as aunts and uncles, and some of us have what we would call an extended family, where our very good friends become our uncles and our aunts, our padrinos y madrinas, godparents, and so these are new people, and they bring something new to the relationship, and they may see things a little bit different, and so we're continuing to learn as we go along. Next slide. Culture. We learn how our culture guides us. Well, in some cultures, showing of emotions is a great thing. In others, you don't show your emotions. In some cultures, men are supposed to be stoic and brave and the big supporters of the family. And in other families, or the same families, maybe the moms are supposed to be the nurturers, the caretakers, the ones who educate the kids in the social emotional learning. And then there are other families in which those responsibilities are not unique to gender, but rather everybody shares in the whole kind of thing. And yes, men are allowed to cry, boys are allowed to cry, women and girls are allowed to cry, people are allowed to show their emotions. And yes, in some cases, even anger is essential to be expressed. However, anger in an appropriate manner, meaning not to hurt or harm another person, but to express that anger so that it gets out in the open. Culture also tells us how we should interact with others. In my culture, I was always told, look right into a person's eyes and don't take away your looking at them. If you do, it means a lack of respect. Or as my dad used to say, what are you hiding from me? In other cultures, having direct eye contact with an adult or a person that you meet is a sign of disrespect. And something that we all have to deal with, and this is probably something that some of us are actually missing in this period of time, is physical touch. In some cultures, when you greet somebody, you shake hands. In some cultures, you shake hands, you give a hug, and you give pats on the back. In other cultures, you hug a person, give a kiss on each cheek. Hugging, kissing is part of daily greeting. Even if you don't know the person, you still do that. And in other cultures, it's a case of don't touch me at all. And so we've all learned these kind of things. And then my favorite one is that as you act at home isn't necessarily what you do in public. So at home, you may be relaxing as a child, as an adult, and you want to kick your shoes off and just lay back and hang back. Well, we don't do that in school, obviously, and we don't do that in public places, or at least usually we don't, because it's not the same behavior that's appropriate. And we have to learn when certain things are appropriate and certain things are not, as per our culture. And we also learn how to interact with other cultures. New Brunswick is an amazing place because we have so many different ethnicities and cultures right here in our midst. And we all watch one another and we learn from one another and we begin to understand one another and how people are. For instance, New Brunswick used to be the second largest state with Hungarian population. That has now changed. We still do have Hungarians in New Brunswick. We also have Caucasians in New Brunswick. We have African Americans in New Brunswick. We have Africans in New Brunswick. We have persons from Latin, South America, and some even from Spain who are here. All different kinds of cultures, all here in one. And one thing that we learn early on, or hopefully learn, is to respect each other's custom or their belief, because it's important not only for them to be respected, but for us to learn how to respect others, that we too may be respected. How does culture or tradition, well, how do we do things according to our culture? So Thanksgiving is an example for me. For me, Thanksgiving means I have a roasted turkey that has stuffing in it, and I have some mashed potatoes, and I have some corn, and I have some rolls, and I have gravy. That's my Thanksgiving. Christmas. Well, do you celebrate on the night of the 24th? Or do you celebrate on the day of the 25th? And how do we deal with those two things? What does our culture tell us we are supposed to do in terms of certain day-to-day activities? And ways that we can show or not show our emotions, as I've mentioned before, and also things that have been handed down from one generation to another. The ideas, for instance, of how children might be disciplined, the importance of education. I seem to have lost the presentation. There it is. Thank you. So those kind of things that, when is the right time to be out of the house for children? Or is there a right time for the kids to be out of the house? According to some cultures, no. Your children should be able to stay with you for as long as you want, or they want. In other cultures, there are some parents that are saying, I think it's time for you to move out. How we deal with tragedies in our lives, how we deal with sickness. Some cultures say when a person is sick, you go to the person's home and you provide food and you provide care, you provide all these good things for them. In others, you say, no, leave them alone. How do we celebrate weddings or birthdays? How do we deal with things like death and dying, especially now in this time when we are not able to do the kinds of things that we used to do? I mean, really, folks, who ever heard of a virtual wedding or a virtual funeral. It doesn't allow for us to be present with one another, which affects our emotions. And school. Well, here we learn the rules, as I mentioned, the things that you should do and shouldn't do. We learn good behavior. We learn good study habits. We learn how to do things together cooperatively. In fact, from kindergarten on in my day, this was before advanced education, the first thing that we learned was how to share. How do we share our crayons, and how do we share with the paper and all the things that were there, so that we began to build community with one another, have healthy relationships. And community building, building friends within the school, having a sense of this is my class, this is my grade, this is my school, all of which is community. And also the role modeling, educators in the room, parents who are with me tonight. We are the role models for children as to how they know how to deal with anger, how they deal with frustration, how they deal with humor. All those things, our eyes are always upon us. The eyes are always watching. So let's get to COVID-19. So some things that you might want to be mindful of. If people change in attitudes from outgoing and enthusiastic during this time, tend to get quiet, lethargic, they don't want to do anything. Changes in work habits. I don't care if I do the house chores. I don't care if I do my homework. Who cares if I take a shower? Nobody's going to see me. All those things that we used to do sometimes now don't seem to be as important before. Could it be depression? Could it be being down? Maybe. Eating healthy portions, eating more than once. Used to say 3 meals a day, but now people are overeating, undereating, binge eating, snack eating, and changes in sleeping. Things that we need to be mindful of in ourselves and in children. Sleeping enough? Well, sleeping too much. Getting up at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Sleeping too little. Not going to bed at all, not being able to sleep at all. Changes in our habits and our customs that we need to be aware of. Changes in mood from somebody who's happy and content and outgoing is now suddenly sad or antagonistic or apathetic, aggressive, isolating, and quiet. These are changes during this period of time to be very mindful of, because they may in fact be signs of mental health issues. So what happened? Well, the obvious thing is that something's changed. There's a disruption in the routine. We're no longer having to get up and go to work in some cases, or we're getting up and going to work in the place that we call home. And so our homes have become our offices, they've become our gymnasiums, they've become our restaurants. Our routines are not the same. There's a loss of a significant person in our lives that we rely so much upon. Maybe we're separated from our parents, our grandparents, our godparents, or our friends. Other thing is a loss of mobility, a loss of freedom. We're shelter in place, which means we're not supposed to go out and visit all the time. Losses of income, which make people begin to become anxious. Will I have enough money to pay the bills? And then people who are getting sick, that has become a crisis. And then this loss of ability to do what we used to do and not knowing what to do. Not being able to go to the family who's mourning the death of a friend or a family member. Not being able to go to the bedside of a person who is sick. That loss of physical contact with other people. I've heard some people question, will we ever go back to shaking hands again? Will we ever go back to hugging people? Will we ever go back to just hanging out? So what happens here? Well, because of all these things, anxiety comes in. We start to get worried. We get sad, down, depressed. We have some physical symptoms of this. We're tired all the time. We don't want to do anything. We get irritable. We stay in our rooms and we don't come out. Fear comes about because we don't know what's going to happen or to whom it's going to happen. We don't know if we're going back to school, if we're not going back to school. We don't know, are we ever going to be able to go out and do the things we used to be doing? Or the other thing is people who have used to be talking don't want to talk about anything that's going on. And then I've heard from a lot of people that people are angry right now because they don't know all the time why they're angry, but we see more anger among children and adults. There's more fights going on in the home because people have those things that I've just talked about. And some people do more eating, some people use more substances, some people sleep more, some people do less. Eating, sleeping, socialize in the home. So how should we respond, and what's this role of social emotional learning? Well, we do as we've been taught by our families. How do you handle stress? How do you handle problems in your families? How were you taught in school what to do when something was not easily able to be understood? What does our faith tradition, if we have one, teach us? And what are other people doing? Our friends, our family members? How does our culture and our tradition guide us? Or we do nothing because we simply don't know what to do. And I've heard that as well. We don't know what to do in this time. But you have the skills, we just may not know we have them. So here are some hints. Establish good communication in the home, the learning environment. Talk with one another. But more importantly, learn to listen with empathy, understanding that what we all are going through is a time of uncertainty, a time of maybe few answers. Saying, hey, I know where you're coming from. Learning to let someone finish their thoughts without interrupting. Oh, don't worry about that. Oh, why are you worrying about that? No, learn to listen. Develop supportive relationships so that people can talk about their emotions. Share the challenges that you're going through yourself. You know, sometimes as parents, we think that we should never show our kids that we are vulnerable or that we're struggling. And so the kids then learn, hey, we shouldn't be showing we're struggling either. And yet we all need support of one another. Parents with children, children with their peers, adults with other adults. Remain a part of some community, your faith community, your school community, an outside organization community, maybe your family. During this time of virtual learning and virtual everything like we're doing today. I don't know how many of you are out there, but there's a number of you there. We have the technology to keep in touch. Have consistency. This is the biggest thing that you can do at this time. Have a routine. so that there is some predictability. Get up at the usual time. This is for adults and for children. We don't have to go to work. We don't have to go to school. No, I'm not saying get up at 6 o'clock, but get up at 7 o'clock. Make sure that you go to bed at the usual time. Tomorrow's not a school day. Yes, it is. Go to bed. Have consistency in meals. When you usually would eat, continue to eat. For students who may be watching or listening, go to Google Classroom as if you were in school, because as I understand it, you are in school when you're in Google Classroom. If you are an educator out there this afternoon, here's some things for you to consider. Create interactive activities that create interactions with classmates. So have a time when your students are able to say, okay, I'm not going to go into the breakout room that you put me in. I want to go and talk to my friend. Enable that to happen so that they can see one another and talk with one another, because that's what we're missing, the ability to communicate. And that makes us sad. It makes us angry. It makes us anxious. It's doable. Be sure you set aside at home a time to check in with your children if you're a parent. Ask them how they're doing. Be sure to set aside some time for adults to check in with one another, and I don't mean the 5 minutes before you go to bed. And be open and honest about your own feelings to your children, to your adults, to your families, to your friends. And this lets everybody know that we're all in this together. In fact, that is the slogan, right? We're in this together. And also, when talking about what's going on, if you have younger children, I don't think you have to give the whole details about COVID-19 and how the virus is spread or what can happen to you. Make sure things are age appropriate, while also making sure that kids don't become so frightened. Another thing that I would encourage you to do as a parent or an educator is to monitor your children's use of computers, especially YouTube. There are a number of very scary videos out there dealing with this COVID-19 that are not age appropriate for everybody. Normalize feelings. Hey, let's tell adults and children that we know what it's like to feel anxious, what it's like to feel afraid, what it's like to feel sad. If you're talking about what's going on, it gives an outlet for both adults and children. And then perhaps one of the best things to do is to create a sense of hope. We are not alone. People are going through this in our community, in our nation, in the world. And people will understand your feelings, your concerns. And we have to hold out the hope that things are going to change. We just don't know when. And that for many of us is a problem, because we always want to know what, when, how, where. Some things you can do. Play a game at home. You know, whether the game is ask me 20 questions, but do something at least once a week or twice a week. Something that I strongly recommend for both educators who are doing remote learning and parents in the house: do some physical activity in the day. If you can, go outside and take a walk. If you can't, do some jumping jacks in your house. Do some running in place. You don't have to go outside. Do some meditation. Do some yoga. You can watch a movie together. And today is a beautiful day outside, so today would be a good example. Have an indoor picnic. Yes, an indoor picnic. As if you were going to go on a picnic in the park, put down a blanket, make the sandwiches, make the whatever it is. You can leave out the ants though. We don't need those. But do something that you would not normally do inside rather, that you would do outside as a change. Do as much as you can virtually. Go to a birthday party of your friends. Encourage people to do what we're doing here, to Zoom a birthday party, to Zoom some significant thing at home. Go to a weekend dinner with your family in which you're eating dinner and they're eating dinner and you're both watching each other do that. Connectedness. If that's not your thing, well, hey, I bet many people have closets that need to be cleaned, or some housework that needs to be done. Or maybe you were thinking about painting the room. Something that you can do that's different. Listen to some calming music if you're anxious. Or if you want to have good music and you want to get up and dance, well, then dance together. Hip hop, salsa, whatever your music may be. It's exciting, and you laugh. How many kids have watched their parents dance? Maybe not a lot. How many of us have watched our kids dance? Maybe not a lot. And encourage that participation among every member of the family, that nobody gets to sit out, everybody is going to participate. Well, how do we do this if people are not motivated? Talk about how they are doing, not what they not about what they are not doing. So for instance, you didn't do your homework, you didn't clean your room, you didn't do that, you didn't do that. How you doing? How you feeling? Because I guarantee you that whatever it is they didn't do is connected to how they're feeling. Be supportive of their feelings. Don't minimize them. Don't say, that's nothing. Also, don't have an all or nothing attitude, meaning let's try to do some changes, a little bit of changes. So I know educators, you may not like this, but if they're not tuning in every day to school, hey, let's try at least to get them to tune in twice a week. We can build it up to 3 times a week and 4 times a week and 5 times a week. If they're not doing their homework on a regular basis, okay, let's try to do it 2 times. Okay, you succeeded, let's do it 3 times. Clean the house at least once a week. It doesn't have to be every day. Celebrate the small improvements that you see among people. Also, another thing you can do is an incentive approach, sometimes called the token economy. If you do fill in the blank, whatever it is you want them to do, for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, you'll get 2 points. And if at the end of the week you have 10 points, not counting Saturday or Sunday, you can watch a movie. You can pick out the movie. We can play a game. It gives the incentive for younger children, even older children, the ability to do something. By the way, adults, you might want to do the same thing for you. If you're not motivated, well, the more that you've done something, then celebrate. Give yourself something that you would like. Now, if things just become too difficult to handle, if people are too sad, too depressed, too everything, then there's some things you need to do. Reach out to a trusted friend, a person that you can rely upon. And if all else fails, if it really is getting bad, you need to reach out to a professional. And in New Brunswick, in the surrounding communities, there are a number of places that we can go. So this is the time for questions, but I just wanted you to see, here's some ideas of things that you can do. We have a family sitting around the table talking. Many of us don't do that. Many of us don't eat together anymore. The other side, we have a family that is absolutely sitting and talking one another, close together. And on the bottom, hey, that's telecommunication. Three friends that are talking to one another through what we're doing now. So I believe this is time for some questions.
That was amazing, Dr. Steger. Thank you. We have some questions ready. I just wanted to touch back when you were mentioning physical activity and still rewarding yourself with things to do. The district also provides opportunities for you to tune in virtually. We have some of our amazing PE teachers in the district running virtual workout and exercising and yoga sessions. All of that is publicized on Twitter. If you follow New Brunswick Public Schools, a lot of time the district is retweeting whenever stuff like that is happening. It's also listed at the bottom of our website. Every time, the beginning of the next week, all of those virtual events, working out, relaxation days, wind down Wednesdays, all of those will be listed on the district site. And just in case you or your family might be looking for something to do or might not be sure where to start. Thank you, Dr. Steger.
You're welcome.
One of the questions that we received, which I think was recurring a lot, was what are some instructional or emotional strategies that can be implemented for students experiencing COVID-19 related trauma?
It depends upon the level of the trauma, to be honest. The key to working with persons who have had a traumatic experience, and to be rest assured that people getting sick, people dying is definitely traumatic, and all the other things that are happening to us as well. The first thing is to acknowledge that something has happened. Not to say, as I mentioned before, get over it, but to listen to them and hear the emotion that is going on. As educators, as family, as friends, being as supportive and empathetic as we can to people. However, honestly, trauma-related instances should be referred out to a mental health professional, because there are certain techniques that we use in mental health training that would enable us to work through that trauma in the individual.
Awesome, amazing. Thank you.
Another thing is, don't deny whatever they're saying has happened or is happening isn't happening.
Thank you. And I think that's something that's really good that can apply to students of kind of all levels, regardless if they're a high school student or if they're a younger pre-K student. Some of those same techniques can be applied. Another question that we were receiving from district staff within our district, and then teachers from other districts that might be tuned into the webinar right now, is what are some ways to motivate your students during this pandemic? I know you touched on that a little bit, but could you maybe provide some more alternatives or options?
That's a tough one in this day and age. However, one way that we can promote more, I guess, participation in learning is to take some time in that learning to make whatever is going on in life right now relevant to what you're teaching. I think as educators, we sometimes put our curriculum above the needs, the emotional needs of our students. And so taking maybe 5 or 10 minutes out of that lesson, if you're doing live teaching, to say, hey, let's check in with you, what's going on? Let them talk back to you and promote some kind of discussion. Also, I think making things more upbeat. I teach online all the time, and one thing that I have tried to do is to incorporate a YouTube video, an appropriate one to the course that my students can relate to. And so that education is just not hearing and reading, it's also seeing and listening. Play some soothing music, or play some controversial music. I know that goes against a lot of things that we know, but that's going to keep the kids more interested in what's going on, I think, in the classroom, if it's relevant to what's going on right now.
Mhm. And that does spark up good topics of discussion to have. If you're listening to something controversial, you can always turn that into an educational conversation on why is this controversial, and you still can get a learning experience out of that.
Mhm.
Another question, I guess this would be more geared towards teachers and staff members. How do you remain calm during the days that it gets really tough? There's a lot of work going on. What's the best ways just to keep it all together?
Do something fun every day. Ground yourself every day. If you're when you get up in the morning, do whatever it is you need to do. Learn how to do some mindful breathing exercises. Breathing in very slowly and deeply, holding it and then releasing it very slowly. Do it 3 to 5 times. It will relieve the anxiety, the stress, because oxygen coming into the body has a positive effect upon us. As I mentioned before, physical activity. The more physical activity you have, the more endorphins are released within our bodies. And the more endorphins that are happening in our bodies, the more we're going to feel different. Also, again, hey, let's admit that we are not able to handle everything, and sometimes we just have to let go. And maybe something that we think has to be done today doesn't really need to be done today. I think we need to also learn to be gentle with ourselves and not make unrealistic demands.
Yeah, and that's very important, especially at a time like this where things seem to be extremely urgent, and you might want to, as you normally would, finish things as soon as possible, but it might be good just to take a breather and sometimes pace yourself throughout the day. The next question that we have is related to OCD. So another district staff member mentioned, how can you be able to control OCD at this time?
I wish I could explain that all on a webinar such as this. OCD is a very specific malady of our minds and our actions that usually is related to something that we think we need to do all the time, and may in fact also be related to some kind of a trauma. So I'm not quite sure what kind of OCD we're talking about either. During this time in which we're told wash your hands, wash your hands. Well, if somebody has a hand washing OCD compunction or a cleaning the house compunction, you know, asking what would happen if you didn't do it once or twice. But in reality, that too is an issue that you really need to reach out to somebody who is a professional, because it's not going to be cured in a 1 or 2 minute answer. It really does require some professional help.
That's really great. Thank you. Of course, we're going through and answering some of the questions that are being submitted using the link at the bottom of your screens right now, mbpschools.net/questions. If you're in our actual webinar right now, or if you're viewing it from the other locations that we're streaming it to, you can also access this link and submit your questions in English and Spanish for Dr. Steger to respond to. So the next one is another question regarding strategies. What are the best strategies to help our students with mental health? The stress and the depression. What are just some of the things that teachers can provide their students with, just to help them through the day?
One thing is to demystify what we might call mental health. Having a mental health issue does not mean that you are dysfunctional. It doesn't mean that you're sick, and it certainly doesn't mean what oftentimes I hear, that the person is crazy. Normalize that there are being sad, being depressed, being anxious, all those things I've mentioned today, those are normal emotions. Try encouraging students to talk to people about it, to admit that they have an issue that's going on, because our students are very much like we are oftentimes. They know they have a problem, they just don't know what to do about it, or they pretend they don't have a problem and don't do anything about it. So educators, if you are noticing that a student seems to be down, seems to be a little less enthusiastic, check it out with the student. Again, asking, how are you doing? Because that will mean that you care. And many times people want to know that their teachers care about them. And I know you do care about your students, especially now. And then ultimately, if you believe that the student could benefit from some help, you can always refer them to either a school social worker or again, suggest that they might want to reach out to one of the agencies in our community.
That's wonderful. Another question that a member of our district had was, how can parents have access to all the mental health support that we have going on?
I believe the district has information on the district website. I also understand that some of the schools that the children are in have additional resources posted on their school websites. You can also go to Middlesex County Department of Social Services website, and those are there. Some of the more common ones are Rutgers Behavioral Health, which you just have to put that into your browser and it will come up. There are also some community-based organizations that are around, and certainly, at this point in time, school-based is providing some services to students.
Thank you. So if you're ever looking for that, in addendum onto where to find the stuff on our district website, it is on our coronavirus advisory site. We have that listed under parents. You can find some of the mental health resources that our superintendent, Dr. Johnson, has sent out to community and to our staff members, just in case you need phone numbers for support or you want to visit their websites. That all of that information is available on the district website. This one, the next question we have coming up is more specific to high school students. So a parent asks, what are some techniques to help with stress for high school students specifically?
To handle stress?
Yes.
Well, some strategies there is making sure that the student is taking time out to rest, that the student is not going to bed at 3 o'clock in the morning. Limit video games that may be out there. Encourage them as well to participate in some kind of physical activity within the house. Also release some pressure from them, saying, hey, this is a difficult time. You're really stressed out. Why don't you just kind of sit and listen to some music, do something, just chill a bit, call one of your friends, talk to one of your friends, do something like that. Physical activity is always a good thing for high school kids, any of us to do. Also be connected to supportive people, whether it's an older member of their family, maybe a brother or a sister, an aunt or an uncle, maybe even a grandparent. What I know is that oftentimes our teenage folks don't want to talk to their parents. And that's been going on since I'm sure there were teenagers and parents. So again, parents being aware of seeing the stress and trying not to add more stress to them is helpful. By not pushing them as much as maybe you would normally do, giving them a day to just do absolutely positively nothing. Those are some ways.
Amazing. Those are really great strategies. So we're going to be answering 3 more questions. So one of the questions that just came in, how can we ensure that we're supporting our students' social emotional health once we return to school? So, it's good to have all of this now, but how can we continue to making sure these practices are best upheld when we're back in school normally?
Well, I'm going to put that back on school administrators and school educators and parents who are listening. What we tend to do is we go from crisis to crisis and we deal with things. But whatever you're doing now that is supportive, whatever we're doing now that is helping in some way, shape, or form, we need to continue. We need to make a commitment. For instance, one thing I've been thinking about is, remote learning is an opportunity, for instance, for home instruction. So I know that in some districts that home instruction is done. Having students who are sick or are not home, home for extended periods of time, having remote learning. I know it would be an investment for districts to do, to have the technology to do that, that we don't stop taking care of one another, checking in with one another, being sensitive to one another, just because coronavirus has disappeared again. We need to continue whatever it is we're doing now and do more. In terms of mental health, I think every school ought to be having some kind of a mental health awareness, and not only for the students, but also for the staff and for the administrators, as well as for the parents, because there is a great mystique about what mental health is, because we always call it mental illness. Well, no, there is something called mental health. It may not be good health, maybe it's good health, but we have to promote healthier attitudes by talking about what it is, using the professionals that we have.
And that's really wonderful. And I think that's good for everyone to take something from, whether you're in our district or you're from elsewhere, listening in, our partners, our friends everywhere. This is really good information. The next question that we have definitely could apply to multiple people, no matter where you're at or whatever work you're doing in any capacity right now. How can caregivers take care of their mental health while attending to a loved one who is infected? And this can
Yes.
even apply to students as well, I would think.
That is a very good thing. An excellent question. Obviously, the one thing we have to do is remember that perhaps people can share in the responsibility of caretaking, if it is possible, because one person or two people may not be able to do it. We need to take breaks from our caregiving and let somebody take care of us. We need to make sure that we are eating, that we are sleeping, that we're resting, that we're laughing, that we're exercising. All those things that I've mentioned today that our students should be doing, we all should be doing if we're taking care of people. And also that we reach out to one another. If we're having a real difficult time, reach out to somebody that you trust, and also someone who isn't going to give you advice, but somebody who's going to listen. Sometimes we always want to have the advice. We think we have to give an answer to something when people really just want us to listen. And especially at this time, because honestly, folks, we don't have a lot of answers to when this is going to be over, what's going to come next. We don't know that. But what we do know is that we're struggling. So let's admit that we're struggling. That goes back to the cultural factors. Whatever your culture says about being the strong one, sometimes we have to become the weak person in order to become the strong person again.
And that, I think, is really a powerful statement. And you've answered a couple more questions that we had lined up just with that statement alone. So thank you so much, Dr. Steger, for all of the information that you provided us within the past hour. I think a lot of us can take something away from this amazing webinar today, and your insight was definitely helpful.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to be a part of this.
We'd also like to really importantly thank the New Brunswick Board of Education for making this opportunity available to the community as we move forward in our defense against COVID-19 and ensuring that all of our students are safe, healthy, and happy as possible. New Brunswick Public Schools will be offering as much as we can. If you ever have any ideas, concerns, or suggestions or recommendations, you are feel free to message us on our district website, or you can send us an email, and we'll take those considerations into question and, you know, really try to find ways to help the community as best as possible. We'd also like to thank our partners for the school-based youth services system program, YAP Inc. and New Brunswick Tomorrow. Our partners are really important when it comes to making sure great opportunities like this are available to the community. So once again, thank you for joining us for the Ask the Counselor webinar on mental health and social emotional learning during COVID-19, hosted by the New Brunswick Board of Education. And we'll see you next time.